Welcome back. Today we are continuing our methodological disputes between the Austrian School of Economics and the Marxist school, and we're actually going to finish this topic today. But before beginning, let me say that I did watch yesterday the debate on the labor theory of value between J.F. Garepi and a Marxist who defended it, and I have to admit that I wasn't very happy with a lot of the things that were said there. I think that there were certain misconceptions, and I will be making a commentary on JF's position on the labor theory of value sometime from now. Not this week, not next week either, because I have other things to do, but surely for 2 weeks from now probably I will be making this commentary. So with that being said, you might recall that last time we commented on the first of 3 main methodological disputes that Bukharin outlines in his economic theory of the leisure class, and the first one was essentially the distinction between the Marxist objectivist notion of how to study a society based on the social laws, the social patterns that then go ahead and explain certain individual phenomena, and the Austrian school that does this in the other way around, where they start with this isolated atom that is an homo economicus, and they try to derive social laws from there. Now, we saw already that the Marxist method is more scientific, and it actually reflects a lot better the nature of any social structure. But today we are going to continue with our last 2. The first being that there is a main conflict between our schools on the issue of whether or not we should study social structures, specifically the capitalist social structure, as a historical, temporal system, or as a more universal and more abstract system that somehow was all along within us and that we were just trying to break into it. And to begin our discussion on this point, it is important to note one fundamental aspect of the Marxist methodology, which actually differentiated it from some methodologies that came before it. Here we're speaking about the first commentary that Bukharin makes on this issue, where he defends the Marxist position, which is a study not only of the material laws of societies, but also a study that acknowledges and tries to contextualize those material social laws that we see within their historical period, that tries to understand them as belonging to a historical continuum, not as some sort of abstract and universal laws that govern all societies before them. This was, for example, the approach of the physiocrats, which was a school of economics even before the Marxist or the classical school, founded in France by François Quesnay, who essentially was a school that developed, I would say, to some extent, economic thinking, precisely because they started to favor more this materialistic study of societies, where they looked at the economic laws, at the social relations of the individuals belonging to those societies in order to make a scientific study of them. However, where Marx clearly is differentiated from this tradition is on the fact that Marx acknowledges, as the physiocrats didn't do, that this, for example, the capitalism of production is historical, and it is within a given context, and it is temporal. So it hasn't existed all throughout history. It obeys certain historical laws that exist within the period in which it is developing, and that it will someday end. So it is therefore not only necessary to study the social material laws that govern our given mode of production, but it is also important to acknowledge the fact that they are temporal, and that as soon as our societies change from their given social material structure to a different one, that life within that new society is governed by different laws. And here Bukharin quotes Marx in a sentence that I think is really gets to the root of the issue here, and that I think represents very accurately what the Marxist position on this issue is. Thus, Marx states, as soon as life has gone beyond a given period of evolution, has passed from one given stage into another, it also begins to be guided by other laws. Now, this does not imply, as anyone who has some sort of reason will see, that Marx believed that there were not generalizable laws across societies, that there aren't laws that govern our current mode of production that were not also present in other modes of production. For example, the theory of evolution of natural selection is occurring at all times, and it is certainly occurring during capitalist stage of history, during the feudal stage of history, or during a slave-based economy. However, when we are speaking about economic laws, these do not have this, well, a lot of them don't have this universal character to them. So when we are studying political economy, which is the science that tries to study particularly the capitalist mode of production, we are necessarily studying a certain set of categories that are only applicable to capitalist societies or to other societies so long as they function within a given context similarly to capitalist societies. So if we want to understand, for example, the nature of value, if we want to understand commodity fetishism, if we want to understand surplus value in the form that it takes in capitalist societies, we need to look at these categories within their historical context. And this is something important to keep in mind, because there tends to be a misconception of socialist societies from the part of those who criticize them by trying, in a sense, to present them as the proof that the labor theory of value is wrong, and these kinds of things that, of course, don't make any sense. Because when we're speaking about socialist societies, this is an entirely different topic, but in a social structure that has overcome the capitalist mode of production, to speak about value, to speak about the labor theory of value, will not really make too much sense, because once the social laws have transcended the ones that exist now, we cannot really understand them using the same analytical tools as before. However, this approach is not really followed by the Austrian economists, specifically by the first generation of Austrian economists, specifically by von Bauer, where they try to present a different methodology that focuses on capitalism as a sort of universal system. So they're trying to prove there, in a sense, the universality of our current state of affairs, as they are at the same time trying to perpetuate it and trying to present it as the end all, the best way in which we could possibly organize our society, and the only actual way where it could be organized in a way that is efficient and that is good for the whole of society. So here it is quite implicit the intention not to scientifically analyze our mode of production, but on the other hand, of trying to pick certain things and trying to universalize them and trying to idealize, and this is a modus operandi that is shared by even neoclassical economics, by trying to idealize certain things of capitalism, trying to present them as universal in order to glorify and show how capitalism is, in its idealized form, is the best mode of production and the one that is most efficient and the one that maximizes agents, utilities, and so on and so forth. Bukharin here provides us with a very accurate example of this methodological difference when Marx, for example, looks as capital not as a thing, not as an object that you can in a sense point to in any given point in time, in any stage in history, but he presents it more as a relation, as a process that emanates from the given definite social relations that exist in the production process of capitalist societies. Capital, therefore, is contextualized and it is understood within the continuum in which it exists. However, for the Austrians, capital becomes just that thing that you can point to. It becomes the machinery, the means of production themselves, and capital can therefore be generalized to all forms of society because, for example, hammers have existed long before there was any capitalism. Therefore, hammers, being a part of capital, were capital even before capitalism even existed, which is something that Marx, of course, would be completely against, because capital is the specific form that the means of production take in capitalist societies. And of course, this capital is a process. It is not, a universal particular thing that you can point to in every society. Neoclassical economics, in a sense, adopts this Austrian conception of capital, and now it puts it within its given mathematical framework as a variable within a production function, such as the Cobb-Douglas production function, where you have that production is essentially, output is essentially the product of labor and capital, each multiplied by each other, each being elevated at a certain power. And then what you see is capital not even as a process or anything, but just as a variable within a given production function, which is fetishizing it even more. Therefore, by abstracting from the social nature of these categories, what the Austrians are doing is trying to present them to us as universal categories, as if they were with us all along, and they are crippling their own methodology because they are unable to understand the social phenomena that is implied, and they are, in a sense, taking outside of them their given content, right? So capital is not, for example, as we've seen, just a thing. Capital is given content in the historical continuum in which it exists. Therefore, you cannot really just point to that object as if that is capital without really crippling your own methodology by not looking at the social relations that are assumed in order for that object to adopt the particular form that it does in the specific mode of production that it exists within. This problem actually happened also within my debate with J.F. Garapi, where when we were looking at the concept of investment, he tried to use, probably unconsciously, the same methodology by looking at investment as a thing that was within us all along. And for example, he was speaking about, in the ancient world, a farmer of chicken that somehow wanted to purchase other things, and in order to do so, he already had his stomach full of chicken, so he went ahead and produced a surplus in order to sell it and get other things, and that constituted an investment. So what we're seeing here is pretty much an anachronism, is not understanding investment as really what it is, as an object that is subject to being given different content in the different historical moment in which it exists. So by putting this category investment that is characteristic of capitalist societies and trying to ascribe it to a different society, even prior to any complex social structure, and ascribing to the producer the kind of mental motivations of modern producers and so on and so forth, this is fallacious. This is a methodology that completely ignores the specific particularities, historical particularities of the moment that you're looking at. And this is why we should be careful, and this is why the Marxist methodology that specifically takes care of these issues is more scientific. So now we get to the last of these methodological disputes, which is the analytical importance that we place over production and consumption. Now, this is not, again, a trivial point, as were the other two, because Marx is really going to consider production as what gives life to societies, because it is in fact the production process where wealth is created, and it is the production process where a lot of our lives happen. They occur in there, and they are shaped. Not only our lives, but society in general is shaped by production. But the Austrian school is going to do quite the opposite and focus on consumption, and they're going to present us this notion of consumers as, in a sense, the dominant element of society that is that essentially has the producer as a servant, as someone who is trying to figure out what are their needs and so on and so forth in order to meet them. So we are going to get a flipping of this process on its head in a manner that I am going to argue is pretty ideological. So we Marxists believe that it is generally the case that consumption has to be preceded by some form of production. So unless someone has produced for you, you cannot really go to the market and consume without bringing something yourself, without actually having produced something yourself. Again, unless you are taking some wealth that has been created from other people. For example, a kid that consumes milk certainly has not produced anything to exchange for milk. However, their parents have indeed produced, or if their parents, for example, belong to the capitalist class or belong to any other sector of the economy that is not productive, then what they are doing is they are using wealth that has been created by other people in order to exchange that in the market for other goods and services that then they can enjoy. Now, I've said this a lot of times already, but watching yesterday's debate, I don't think that is very clear to a lot of people. But the fact that some people work in an unproductive sector of the economy does not mean that their work is unnecessary or that it is trivial or that it is morally wrong. We are just doing a description there. There is some work whose wages are exchanged against revenue, and there is some work whose wages are exchanged against variable capital. So this is not a matter of morality or who deserves what. This is just a matter of a description of reality. So if you are, for example, a guard, you don't produce anything. However, your work is still necessary, and you get paid wages that you can then use to consume certain goods and services which constitute a surplus that other people have created. This does not entail any moral implications aside from the ones that you yourself might want to give it or that I might want to give it, but this is just a descriptive thing. So again, no moral implications in this, but the main point isn't this. The main point is essentially that production is where we should place analytical priority precisely because of its importance to economic life. But however, the Austrians are not going to do this. They are, on the other hand, going to start from, at least von Bauer is going to do so, because again, there's conflicts in the Austrian tradition, and some try to dissent a little bit from this methodology, but it is generally accepted that the starting point is the needs and wants and the utility and psychological motivations of the individual agent of the Homo economicus, and that is essentially the starting point, and therefore consumption and the subjective valuation of the goods and services that they take as a given is their starting point. And this is not trivial, because when they start their analysis by focusing on consumption, they require, in a sense, to take the goods that have been produced in that society as a given. And this is something that already Bukharin notes, that is precisely why they are, in a sense, forced to make all of these appeals to the isolated island, to the uninhabited desert, to the Robinson Crusoe, and so on and so forth. This is precisely because in their attempt to abstract from all that is social, They are running away from the specifics, from the things that actually give content to society. And by focusing on consumption, they need to abstract from production, so they need to take goods as a given, which is something that it is not justified, as we're going to see. And here I also want to note that this is in fact a fundamental sin that is behind their erroneous conception of subjective value, because by focusing on utility and by abstracting from production, you are in a sense forced into the conclusion that value is indeed subjective, and that the only thing that matters to value is just use value. It's just a subjective valuation of the individuals that are looking and that are consuming those goods. And so the reason why I say that it is not justified to take the fruit of labor, the fruits of production as a given, it's because of three main reasons that Bukharin also notes, and that are actually taken from Marx himself, which are essentially that it is production actually that creates, that produces, that's why it's called production, the goods that are consumed. Then it is also the case that it is the production process that determines in a lot of ways the way in which those goods are consumed. So production is not to be isolated from consumption, because it in fact determines to a large extent the way that things are consumed. It is not a matter of occasion that consumerism has become a prevalent feature of our superstructure, of the capitalist superstructure. It is not, again, a matter of just a thing that was going through there. This is, in fact, something that is characterized, that it has been determined by the production of our societies, by the way that production is organized, and by the development of our economic system. And thirdly, and this is something that I've also commented in the past, because production creates new needs. So, and this is something that actually Dinesh D'Souza, when he debated Matilahonti, even commented. This goes really well into this section here. Is this phrase that Apple produced the iPhone and developed the iPhone even before we knew that we couldn't live without it. So it is production also that influences a lot our needs and our wants and our utilities. Those things that are subjective are very highly influenced by production itself. So you cannot abstract from production. You cannot just take it as a given. You need to look at it. And in fact, not only look at it, but you need to look at it first, because it is from there where pretty much the rest of our society springs, from that particular point. And it is thus these fundamental sins of the Austrian methodology that actually cripples it in its understanding, or in its attempt to understand social phenomena in capitalist societies. It is essentially incapable. It cannot understand properly social phenomena, precisely because it is constantly trying to run away from it. It is constantly trying to ignore the social content of things, and this is why it fails so often to explain phenomena of social nature. And this is something that actually Schumpeter even accepted. So Schumpeter is so there's some people that don't like to put him in the Austrian school. I think that he is part of the Austrian school, but he was certainly critical with some things, and he's a figure in economic in the history of economic thinking that is really important, that is relevant. Although I certainly have my disagreements with him, but even he himself admitted, particularly the problematic that, and Bukharin also notes this, that the Austrian school really is really crippled in their study of social phenomena, precisely because of this fundamental methodological problem. So this would be pretty much it as far as the methodological disputes between our schools are concerned. Now, this doesn't mean that there are not other things that need to be commented on in this particular issue, and we will certainly go through some other concepts where there's conflict between our schools. But this is a good outline, and I think that the way that Bukharin treats this in his book is also very interesting. So once again, I encourage people to go and read that first chapter if they're interested. And this is pretty much it for this video too. Next up, we are going to be looking at the text of the Austrian economists themselves. So we're going to be looking at texts from Hayek, from Mises. We're going to look at von Baerk. We're also going to look at Schumpeter, probably in his book where he talks, in the first chapter of his book, where he comments on what he considers to be some of the most important figures in the history of economic thought, from Marx to Keynes. And he has a commentary of Marx, a very extensive commentary of Marx that I also want to look at. So we're going to do a lot more work in this subject, and it is quite interesting, and this will also help us understand better our own methodology, our own analytical categories, and this will help us really also comment on what are potential flaws within our given framework, and how we could come about improving certain things, and how we can come about bringing a theory and a proposal of change that is actually sound and that it's formally valid. So this is pretty much it. I hope you enjoyed this content, and if you do, again, you can support me by subscribing, by liking, and so on. And well, I will see you in the next video.